Clarence Thomas never misses an opportunity to disappoint me. In a 6-3 decision today, the Supreme Court voted to dismantle the Voting Rights Act. 6 conservative justices, including Clarence Thomas, voted to disenfranchise millions of black voters, voters of color all across America. And all of them should be held accountable, don't get me wrong here. But specifically Clarence Thomas, being only one of 2 black justices, the only black man on the court, votes to dismantle the voting rights of his own community? The same community that worked for decades to uplift black voters and black voices in our government votes to then go undermine all of that work. That's despicable. Am I surprised? No. Am I disappointed? Always. But this issue just really blows my mind. The cognitive dissonance he can have sitting on the highest court of the land, never has to worry about getting elected, makes a decision that makes it so much more difficult for black voices to be amplified in our government. Shame on you, Clarence Thomas. Shame on you.
For meet a black man that's so anti-black you just feel like it's a setup. That's Clarence Thomas, the longest-serving judge on the Supreme Court, and the one most committed to rolling back the very rights that allowed him to rise. And his wife, that's the kind of white woman that's every black woman's worst nightmare. But we'll get to her. So let's start at the beginning. Clarence Thomas was born in 1948 in Pinpoint, Georgia, dirt poor and Jim Crow raised. He grew up speaking Gullah, was raised Catholic, went to seminary, and almost became a priest. But racism followed him everywhere until he flipped. And I don't mean flipped the system. I mean flipped on us. By the time he reached Yale Law School, he started to resent affirmative action. Not the racism that made it necessary, but the fact that white folks assumed he didn't belong. Instead of challenging them, he decided to join them. And in the 1980s, he got cozy with the conservatives. Reagan appointed him to the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. But instead of protecting black workers, this man gutted the very...
I'm L. Joy Williams, president of the NAACP New York State Conference. This week, the Supreme Court handed down a decision that made it a whole lot easier for elected leaders to weaken black voting power. By narrowing how the Voting Rights Act can be used in redistricting, this ruling makes it really hard to challenge maps that dilute the voting power of black communities and other communities of color. Now, this comes at a time when Republicans are gerrymandering districts to reshape political power across the country. They are basically changing the rules and rigging the game. It started in Texas when Donald Trump told Republicans to redraw congressional maps, trying to control the outcome of elections before a single ballot was cast in the midterms. And now Florida is all ready to do the same because, of course, Florida. This is a blatant attempt to divide communities, to weaken our voting power and prevent us from holding this administration and their destructive agenda to account. This is going to have devastating impact in the South, but it's also going to dilute the voices of New Yorkers and threaten to skew control of Congress before we even had a chance to head to the ballot box. And now, because of this decision, it's going to be even harder to challenge these maps in court. The maps that we know are drawn specifically to dilute our voice. But we're not giving up. We are fighting forward. We are absolutely ready for this fight. We're going to protect the voting rights and equal protection that we deserve and we have fought for. We're going to respond to the Republican-led gerrymandering and protect our voices while making sure every vote counts equally, and that work starts in the states. We did it before when we fought to pass the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act of New York, and we're going to do it again. Now, I want to be clear that this is not a fight that we wanted. But if we sit back and do nothing, the rules will keep being rewritten without us. And our ability to use the ballot box to fight for our communities will continue to be eroded. Virginia, just last week, showed up to protect minority voting power, and now it's our turn. We have been building with our partners and our friends across the state for this moment, And you're going to hear more from us very soon about what you need to do. So stay tuned to see how you can join the fight for fair representation, because this is how we move Black New York forward.
America has only been a true democracy since 1965, and we are reverting back now. We're reverting back. And the fact that this man was one of the Supreme Court justices who voted for this is a travesty. How is he still on the bench? How? 38 destination vacations, 26 private jet flights, all paid for, luxury yachts. This man has been living it up in his 35 years on the court. From 1998 through 2003, Thomas accepted $42,200 in gifts, making him the top gift recipient on the court at the time by about $36,000. No one was even close. After the LA Times highlighted these gifts in 2004, Thomas stopped reporting them on his financial disclosure forms. He just stopped reporting them. The corruption runs deep. A disgrace. When I watched the movie Get Out, all I could think about was this man right here. I thought it was about him. I thought it was a documentary about him.
A Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is facing backlash from the Black community over voting rights. Let's watch these clips and then I'll come back with more commentary.
Let's talk about what the Supreme Court just did, because this is not just a redistricting case. This is America putting the Voting Rights Act on a table, pulling out a bone saw, and calling it constitutional surgery. In Louisiana v. Callius, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 to strike down Louisiana's map with a second majority Black congressional district. That district existed because Black voters make up about 1/3 of Louisiana's population, but had only one majority Black district out of 6. The map was supposed to fix vote dilution under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. The court said no. So apparently when Black voters are cracked, diluted, and politically muted, that is just map making. But when the state tries to fix it, suddenly everybody faints into the Constitution. Please. This is not colorblind justice. This is color-coded power protection, wearing a black robe. The Voting Rights Act was passed because this country has always found creative little ways to tell Black people, technically you can vote. Practically, good luck. First it was poll taxes, then literacy test, then intimidation, then purges, then gerrymandering. Now it is proof they meant to discriminate. That is the trick. Because under this ruling, it becomes much harder to challenge discriminatory maps unless you can prove intentional discrimination. And unless some lawmaker writes, "Dear Diary, today I suppressed Black voters," in a glitter pen, that standard is a legal locked door. Reuters described the decision as shifting Section 2 away from the results-based protection Congress created and toward an intent standard critics say is nearly impossible to meet. And let's be very clear, Black voting rights are not a side issue. They are not a special interest. They are the emergency lights on American democracy. Justin Kagan warned this was another chapter in what she called the court's now completed demolition of the Voting Rights Act. And she's right, because if states can draw maps that weaken Black voters, then hide behind the "we did not say the quiet part out loud," democracy is not being protected. It's being laundered. This is how rights get stolen now. Not always with fire hoses, not always with mobs, sometimes with footnotes, sometimes with maps, sometimes with 6 justices acting like history is an inconvenience. So yes, we need to fight for Black people, not as charity, not as performance, not because it is trendy, because this country would not even have a functioning moral compass without Black Americans forcing it to read its own damn Constitution. And if they can strip political power from Black voters, they can strip it from anyone. This is not backward. This is deliberate. And we better start acting like democracy is not guaranteed, because the Supreme Court just reminded us it comes with an expiration date if we do not defend it. They are not confused about history. They are counting on us being too exhausted to stop them from repeating it.
Clarence Thomas wakes up every day and says rats when his melanin-eating virus that he's building in a laboratory under the Supreme Court doesn't work. One time, Clarence Thomas went to a bar and punched out a mirror, and they're like, "Why did you do that?" He's like, "My bad, I was drunk. I thought I saw another black man."
I really want to know what's going on in his noggin. This man is the poster child of self-hatred. And you know what I mean. So as you already heard earlier this morning, the Supreme Court made a decision about the Alabama redistricting case, in which the Republicans took it to an extreme to try to disenfranchise black voters. And there was two conservative justices that sided with the liberal justices to say, yes, this map was indeed disenfranchising black voters. Now, one would think that maybe this justice right here would agree. But like always, he's a disappointment. He never fails. So what he did instead was write a 50-page dissent about why the Supreme Court should have gutted voting rights. Yep, this man right here. The Supreme Court found that Alabama violated the Voting Rights Act ban on racial gerrymandering, 5-4. And those two conservative judges was Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Brett Kavanaugh. I'm surprised at that one too. So I'm going to read you some of the passage that he actually wrote in his dissent. He wrote that the court's decision that has turned Section 2, the part of the Voting Rights Act that bans gerrymandering based on race, into nothing more than racial entitlement to roughly proportion controls of elective offices, limited only by feasibility, whatever different racial groups consistently prefer different candidates. He also goes on to say that the voting rights doesn't require Alabama intentionally redraw its long-standing congressional districts so that black voters can control a number of seats roughly proportional to the black share of the state's population. Now, Clarence, with the very nice parents, said that he has long been convinced that the Voting Rights Act only regulates voters' ability to actually get to the ballot or cast it. Anyway, the good news is that Alabama will now have to redraw those maps again. Honestly, I wish there was a way that we can indict Clarence. You guys have a blessed night.
Hey, everyone. I have a very urgent message and request. I need you to remember hashtag Save Section 2. Again, hashtag Save Section 2. Now, what is this about? It's about Clarence Thomas. For 30 years, he's been trying to eliminate a very important section of the Voting Rights Act. It's Section 2, which protects us from states that try to draw congressional voting maps that pack most black voters into one single voting district and then crack the remaining black voters into multiple white voting districts across the state. That basically weakens our voting strength. Racist legislatures have been using this trick for years. It's called racial gerrymandering, another form of black voter suppression. And this is after they have already invalidated Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. We must stop Clarence Thomas from doing this. If he succeeds, he will have helped white supremacists destroy the Voting Rights Act, just as we're about to celebrate its 60th anniversary. Now, how can we stop him? First, we got to be intentional. In other words, this must become a priority for the African American community. Second, we must bring awareness to what he's doing. How do we do that? Well, we use that hashtag that I gave you. Hashtag Save Section 2. Hashtag Save Section 2. So use it. Let's make this a national movement. Third, we must contact our congresspeople. Call them and tell them to stop Clarence Thomas from destroying the Voting Rights Act. We must do this. We must be intentional. Again, the hashtag is Save Section 2. Let's do this.
So what actually happens when one of the most powerful judges in America faces backlash from members of his own community over voting rights. And that is the conversation exploding online right now around the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And across social media, podcasts, and political commentaries, many Black Americans are expressing frustration over court decisions they believe weakened voting protections in the United States. To some people, Clarence Thomas represents constitutional consistency and limited government. And to others, it represents decisions that they believe made voting access harder for marginalized communities. And the debate has become extremely emotional. So let's break it down. Why people are upset, and the specific court case being discussed, and why this conversation dominating political commentary online right now.
April 29th, 2026. The Supreme Court just gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And before you scroll past that, let me make sure you understand what was actually just taken. Black people didn't politely ask for the right to vote in 1965. John Lewis got his skull cracked open on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Fannie Lou Hamer got beaten in a jail cell just for helping people register. Medgar Evers was assassinated in his own driveway. That's what the Voting Rights Act was built on. Blood, not paperwork. And now they just stabbed it. Here's the part they count on you not knowing, though. They don't need to take your ballot. They take the map. Every 10 years, they redraw district lines and decide which neighborhoods vote together. Sounds boring, but that decision controls everything. Two ways they do it. Packing. They stuff all black voters into one district so you get one representative while every surrounding district stays majority white. Instead of having influence in 5 races, you got influence in 1. Cracking. They slice black neighborhoods across multiple districts where black people are always the minority. Your vote gets cast and disappears. So what do we actually do? We don't stop voting. That's letting them win twice. Every election, every level, school boards, judges, local races, those shape your daily life more than any presidential election ever will. And beyond voting, collective economics. They can redraw lines, but they can't redraw where our money goes. Black banks, black businesses, black real estate. Build wealth so deliberately that even when they silence the ballot, the dollars still speak. They told us this was coming. Project 2025 wasn't a secret. They burned Tulsa. They destroyed Rosewood. Every time we build power, they come for it. But we got the blueprint now, so let's actually use it. Follow so you stay ahead of everything they're trying to quietly dismantle.
If Clarence Thomas isn't an Uncle Tom, then why did he shut the door that he used himself to get to his position for millions of black people across this country? Because by revoking the 1965 Voter Rights Act, he has done exactly that. He has basically burnt the same bridges that he used to get to his successful point for everybody else that's in the same position that he was once in. So my question still remains. Is Clarence Thomas considered an Uncle Tom? Are you going to say that I don't have a right to ask this question? I'd like to hear what you have to say in the comments. But what I do know right now is that he is more voting for his class than his culture, because his class is that of the 1%. He believes that he deserves to go to that island because there's allegations of him going there. He believes that he's a part of an elite group rather than remembering the culture that brought him up. Now, I can't speak to that culture, but I can respect it, and I still can't imagine that someone of that culture would then burn the bridges that helped him get to where he wanted to go for millions of black people across this country. How is that possible, and why isn't there a battle cry asking for his resignation for what he's done to his own people?
And he has repaid black people with scorn ever since. The important thing to know about his confirmation, other than the fact that he's accused credibly of sexual misconduct, is the polling that got him over the line. And it was the polling that I very much remember. I was one of the few black folk who was against him. It was the polling that showed that about 7 in 10 black people supported his ascension to the seat once held by the great Thurgood Marshall, and he is not his equal. It was black people's support that got wavering members of that Judiciary Committee and wavering senators.
They needed Democratic votes. There was a Democratic majority. That's why Joe Biden is in those hearings running. They needed the Democratic votes.
And it was only black people's support in those polls that got wavering Democrats to vote for him. And he has repaid black people with scorn ever since. Yep. He didn't even speak English until he was 7 years old. He spoke the Geechee tongue and was so afraid to speak in front of white people because he was always told, don't speak Geechee in front of white people because it would embarrass you, that he almost never spoke at all. Mm-hmm. There was a nun, a white nun, whose largesse helped get him through school and get him those good grades. He has been assisted by white patrons, really his whole life, even now by very rich ones, as they fly him around the country. And to your very point, he seems to deeply resent all of the assistance he got, and he wants to make sure that nobody like him ever gets that kind of help again, because it helps his self-image so that he can lie to himself and fool himself and maybe hate himself a little less for having gotten help all along his path to the Supreme Court.
So the outrage largely centers around two Supreme Court cases. The first one is Shelby County v. Older and Novich versus the Democratic National Committee. Now, if you have heard those names before but never really understood why they matter, here is the simplified version. For decades, part of the Voting Rights Act required certain states with histories of racial discrimination to get federal approval before changing voting laws. So supporters said protected minority voters from unfair restriction, and critics argued it gave federal government too much power over states. So in Shelby County versus Holder, the Supreme Court struck down part of the federal oversight system. And in Novich, the court made it harder to challenge some voting restrictions under the federal law. Those decisions sparked massive political debates, and supporters of the ruling said states should control elections, voters' ID improve election confidence, and the Constitution limits federal authority. While the critics argued that the rulings weakened protections that helped minority communities vote easily, and because Clarence Thomas supported those rulings, he became a major target of criticism online. So on social media, reactions have been really intense, and some black commentators are saying that Clarence has betrayed the interest of black voters. Others strongly defend him, arguing that reducing him to race-based expectations is unfair. And that is where this discussion becomes bigger than just one judge. It turns into a larger conversation about identity, politics, and ideology, and whether people are expected to think a certain way based on their race or even background. Some people believe Thomas prioritizes constitutional interpretation over public opinion. Others believe the real-world impact of this ruling matters more than just the legal theory. And online, those two sides are absolutely colliding. And this feels so personal because voting rights discussion in America are always emotional because voting is tied directly to power. People don't just see voting as policy. They see it as representation, fairness, history, and civil rights. And that is why these conversations escalate quickly online. Voting Rights Act carries historical importance connected to the civil rights movement. So when court decisions affect these protections, emotions naturally rise. And at the same time, others argue that election integrity and constitutional limits are also important. So this becomes a clash between two ideas, protecting access versus protecting the state authority and election rules. And depending on your political perspective, you may see Clarence Thomas as either defending constitutional principle or contributing to voting barriers. I want to hear from you guys. Do you think Clarence Thomas is being unfairly criticized? Or do you believe these voting rights concerns are justified? And more importantly, should Supreme Court justice be judged mainly by constitutional interpretation or by the real-world impact of their decisions? Let me know in the comments section below, and kindly remember to keep it respectful. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.